Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We are presenting on the Green Rebuild Initiative and the incredible economics of super green rebuilds. My name is Haley Weinstein. I'm the communications lead for the Clean Coalition, and today we will be hearing from Craig Lewis, an energy expert and the executive director of the Clean Coalition. You will also be hearing from John Bello, president of Bello Global Consulting, and he is an expert in sustainable real estate and engineering. And finally, we will also be hearing from Patrice Hicks. She is the program manager of an excellent program called Rise Homes. And unfortunately, she cannot have her camera on today, but we will be hearing some amazing work from her. Before we dive deep into this webinar, just a couple housekeeping items here. The webinar recording will be available to all attendees within 2 business days. It can also be found on our website, that's clean-coalition.org under events. And if you have any questions at all during this webinar, please feel free to ask them using the question pane on the right side of your screen, and we will hopefully get to all questions at the Q&A section at the end. The Clean Coalition is a very technical nonprofit with the mission to accelerate the transition to renewable energy in a modern grid through technical, policy, and project development expertise. Our renewable energy endgame is to have 100% renewable energy, with 25% of that being local, interconnected within the distribution grid where people live and work, and ensuring resilience without dependence on long-distance transmission lines. The Clean Coalition is proud to present the Green Rebuild Initiative, also known as the GRI, which aims to facilitate sustainable and resilient rebuilds through super green home designs that are all electric, net zero energy, and supported by solar microgrids for unparalleled resilience. The GRI also encourages homes to be designed for high energy efficiency, low embedded carbon, while also being engineered to withstand extreme weather events and built with non-toxic materials. The action plan for the GRI is to educate property owners, architects, builders, policymakers, lenders, insurers, and everybody else about the superiority of super green homes. We will also be illuminating the economic benefits of super green designs, including the associated tax benefits and other incentives, which we'll be diving into today. We will be providing easy access to specifications associated with super green designs, sharing showcases of super green home designs, and finally, our mission is to connect parties for super green outcomes, and that includes property owners, architects, builders, and associated experts. Just a quick run through of what this webinar is going to look like today. We're going to start off hearing from Craig Lewis, and he will be teaching us about what is super green and the 3 components of super green. Then we'll be hearing from John Bello, who will teach us about other considerations for sustainable design and construction, including different types of impacts, fire and smoke resilience. And then lastly, we will be deep diving into the financial incentives for going super green. And we'll be hearing a presentation from Patrice Hicks from Rise Homes, which stands for Rebuilding Incentives for Sustainable Electric Homes. And then we'll also be diving into an economic analysis of different incentives that are available. So without further ado, I'll pass the baton on to Craig Lewis, who will answer the question that is on all of our minds, which is, what is super green?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Haley. That is the question. What is super green? And it looks like the slide just disappeared for me, but I can answer what super green is off the top of my head. So there's 3 fundamental features of super green. The first is the home is 100% electric, meaning there's no gas service to the home whatsoever. And ideally, there's also a 100% EV household. So there would be lots of EV charging going on in the household as well. In addition to all electric, the home will be net zero energy, NZE. And that means that the on-site solar energy production will at least be as much as the amount of energy consumption across the premise over the course of a year. And of course, that net zero also includes the amount of energy used for EV charging on premise, or also at home, also known as at home charging. And then the third component of super green is that there will be a solar microgrid for unparalleled levels of resilience. And you get a solar microgrid by combining a battery system to the solar. By the way, if you don't have a battery system combined with the solar, when the grid goes down, the solar turns off, right? So the solar microgrid is not only keeps the solar on during grid outages, but it also is necessary to provide the resilience, keep the loads on, and provide a grid forming signal. I think I've got control of the slides here, so let me just see how to do that. It doesn't seem to be progressing. Haley, can you just flip it for me? Okay, thank you. So as noted, the first feature of a super green home is 100% electric. So I think this is pretty straightforward. It just means that all the appliances in the household are electric. There's no gas service there, so everything has to be electric. This means that there's a HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, heat pump for heating and cooling the home, and ventilating the home, making sure that you're filtering the air, if which is really important if it's smoky outside, or if there's a COVID toxin floating around. That ventilation is a really critical piece of the solution on an HVAC system. There's also a hot water heat pump for making sure you're getting your hot water from electricity as opposed to gas. The other components, are pretty standard. I think most people are aware of induction cooktops nowadays, and that is important when you get into the kitchen and other appliances. Obviously, you have no gas hookup, so your dryer needs to be electric as well, and there are heat pump dryers, which are the most efficient type of electric dryer. And of course, you want to make sure that your appliances are all as efficient as possible. In addition, you want to make sure you have a way to charge your EVs, and that can be done through a regular outlet. Ideally, you will have an outlet that is at 220 volts so that you can have level 2 charging, charge a lot faster, charge your car a lot faster, or actually have an EV charging appliance, which is optional, right? You can just charge by plugging your car into an outlet, whether it's a 220 or a 120. So I'm going to move on to the second feature of super green, which is net zero energy. So net zero energy, as I noted before, requires that the solar production is at least as much as the home consumes in energy over the course of a year. And the solar needed to achieve net zero energy for homes with Title 24 levels of efficiency and 2 EVs, meaning 22,000 miles of home charging per year. The amount of solar we're going to need is, for a 1,500 square foot house, is a little under 10 kilowatts of solar. That'll get you to net zero. With a 410 watt panel, which is what the Clean Coalition is modeled with here, and what John Bello has modeled with, you'll hear from him later. We need about 24 panels to get to 9.8 kilowatts of solar. And that's what we assume is going to be needed to get to net zero for a 1,500 square foot home. For a 2,500 square foot home, the loads go up. You got a lot more space to condition, right? Your HVAC system is going to be working a lot harder. And so you're going to need a larger solar system. And so that solar system goes up to just under 15 kilowatts for a 2,500 square foot home, which is equivalent to 36 of those panels that I mentioned, the 410 watt Q cells panels, which are we just chose a panel that's widely available in the market in the United States, and we chose one that's cost effective, and so we just model with that. We're not necessarily promoting Q cells, but we know they make a good panel, and it's one of the bigger brands out there. Importantly, the California Energy Code, Title 24, Part 6, falls very short on achieving net zero energy. So the only thing that's required for a 1,500 square foot home under Title 24 is 2 kilowatts of solar. So that's only 5 solar panels, and you can see, you know, for the 1,500 square foot house, 2 kilowatts is a lot less than 10 kilowatts. Same thing for the 2,500 square foot home. It only requires 3 kilowatts instead of 15 kilowatts. So again, like 1/5 the, you basically get to about 20% in net zero if you just follow Title 24. So one of the things that the Clean Coalition finds is that a lot of the property owners and the architects and everybody else, you know, they don't have a lot of knowledge in this, you know, in the realm of net zero. And so we just want to make it really clear that to get to net zero, you're going to need, you know, enough roof space that is clean, right? Doesn't have chimneys, doesn't have vents, doesn't have anything sticking out of it, right? You need a clean, about 700 square feet of clean roof space, and that's to accommodate 507 square feet of solar, and this is for a 1,500 square foot home. You need a little over 500 square feet just to put the solar panels down, and then you have setbacks on all the edges. So to account for the setbacks, you're going to need about 700 square feet to get to net zero, to host the amount of solar you need to get to net zero. For the people that are on the call that are interested in prefabbed construction and prefabbed manufacturing, you know, I would encourage you to take a look at this amount of space and this roof surface and be thinking about how to standardize that in your designs, because this is something that ideally can just come out of the factory in a prefabbed type of situation, whether it's a completely modular house, right? The house is going to come out with this roof surface on it and with the solar on it, or if it's kind of a kit of parts, right? You have a kit that is basically this roof size, and you just put it into the designs, right? It's like Legos, but this should be a Lego piece that snaps in to a home design. There's a lot of additional details down below, but given time constraints, I'll let people peruse that at their leisure. As Haley said, these slides will be available after the webinar. This is basically the roof size to get to that 2,500 square foot home, and the roof size goes up to about 1,000 square feet as needed. About 760 square feet of that is going to be needed for the solar panels alone. And I should mention that the solar panels should be south facing to the greatest extent that you can get them towards the south. If you can't get directly south, go southwest. That's the second best. Then west, and then kind of veer to the east if you have to. But south and southwest is the direction you really want to be. And that is shown in this diagram, this infographic, which again, I'm not going to explain it, but if you study this diagram, you'll see that going south is the direction you really want to go, because that's where the sun is. You know, if you're in the northern hemisphere, the sun path is to the south, and depending on the season, summer the sun is higher, and in winter the sun is lower. So you really want to be thinking south, and you know, to the greatest extent that you can. So now I'm going to move to the microgrid piece of it, the solar microgrid piece, and I'm just going to flip through the next couple slides to say that the solar microgrid has a battery attached to the solar. They're working together, and for everyday use, the solar microgrid is optimizing the economics. It's time shifting that solar from the middle of the day into the evening. 4 to 9 p.m. is when electricity is the most expensive. So you're basically getting energy arbitrage benefit out of the batteries. And these slides kind of explain that a little bit deeper, but I don't have time to get into it, but you can peruse this at your leisure. The main thing I want to get to on the solar microgrid is that the solar microgrid provides resilience. And we're here talking about disaster recovery, right? So that a lot of people had disasters, a lot of people that maybe their house didn't burn down, but they lost power for extended periods of time, right? The solar microgrid makes sure that your critical loads will never turn off, and the rest of your loads will be on for significant percentages of time. That is the biggest value of a solar microgrid. And the Clean Coalition, we have deep expertise in the area of solar microgrids. We have a methodology called VOR 123, which is basically takes you through how you do the load management between your three tiers of loads, tier ones being your critical ones. They should never turn off. And we've got a webinar dedicated to that topic, which I've provided the link to here. And I'll just give you a couple of more slides to highlight the findings of the VOR 123 methodology, which is that this is the level of resilience you get from a solar microgrid. So the tier one loads, your critical ones, they'll never turn off. Those are shown down at the bottom, that bottom layer here in this chart. The tier twos will be on for at least 80% of the time, and the tier threes will be on for significant percentages of the time as well. And I just want to contrast this to a diesel generator. A typical diesel generator provides hardly any resilience compared to a solar microgrid. So a diesel generator is designed usually to take care of your tier one and tier two loads, which is shown over here in this red hashed rectangle in the bottom corner. But once about 2 days, there's about 2 days of fuel supply typically for a diesel generator. And once 2 days is gone, you're off. Everything's gone, turned off, dark. So a solar microgrid will keep your critical loads on forever, the rest of the loads on for significant percentage of the time, which means they are vastly superior to using a diesel generator. And with that, I believe, one more slide. Load management is key to solar microgrids and using them optimally. And so having the ability to toggle your tier two and tier three loads in a prioritized order is very important. And with that, I believe it's John's, we're moving to John. Haley is yeah, okay.
Haley, are you there? Can you give me control so I can, oh, there we go. All right, looks like I have control as well. Oh, and we lost it. This
You're good
is
to
why
go.
we baked in some time for transit speakers. But yeah, can you share the PowerPoint?
I think you're good to go, John.
There we go. All right, thank you, Haley. Good morning, everyone. So today I want to start off with just a quick overview of the design and construction process. This process can get very complicated, so I wanted to try to just outline everything, make it as simple as possible. So a lot of you have probably started working with an architect in the conceptual design phase. You figured out what style of home you're looking for, what size of home you're looking for. And this is really the ideal time to start talking about a net zero home. And the whole idea really is so that we can lower the energy bill as much as possible. It's also a good opportunity to start talking about prefab and modular construction. That's really been a buzzword over the past few weeks. It is not an end-all be-all solution. It is part of the process. Everything else you see here still has to happen in order to make that home accessible, but it is a really valuable component of the process. It speeds up the construction, it alleviates bottlenecks on the crowded streets. So I really encourage you to work with your neighborhood captains to collaborate. Once they create a digital twin in the factory, it makes things a lot quicker, and you can essentially build any style of home in this fashion. So next slide, Haley. Looks like I don't have control.
You do have control.
Okay. Maybe it's just a little delayed. All right, so I want to talk about sustainable design and construction. So, there's a lot of buzzwords out there in the market, but really it's just important for the homeowner to understand the difference between the embodied impacts and the operational impacts. Oh, this is not going to be fun. This does not. Yeah, Haley, it's not transitioning.
All right, I'll do it for you.
All right, so a few years ago, California came out with AB 262. It's the Senate bill for focusing on embodied carbon. It was focused on public infrastructure, but it's also relevant for homes as well. And this slide just outlines that, although we're talking about solar panels and batteries today, it's important to understand the embodied impacts are equally as important and how to assess that in the marketplace. Next slide. All right, so these are some homes I built in Michigan. They are net zero, and we were also able to achieve a 30% reduction in embodied carbon. Nutrition fact label, you're all familiar with it. Embodied carbon and operational carbon, embodied impacts and operational impacts. Best way to understand this is just, when you go out to buy a box of cereal, you get a nutrition fact label, you're making a smart buyer decision, what type of cereal you want to buy based on those facts. And then your operations are basically how you're going to feel, how you're going to operate after consuming that box of cereal. It's a way to understand it. All right, so when we go to Home Depot, we don't have a universal label like organic to go buy rebar or lumber or anything else. So we rely on third-party certifications. There's a lot of them in the marketplace. Some of you are aware of Energy Bar. I'm sure if you look on your coffee cup, sometimes you'll see FSC. It's sustainably sourced paper, essentially, but I don't have a lot of time to go through all of them. I do want to highlight the red list. So Haley, can we get to the red list chart? The next slide. Yeah, okay. So the red list is the worst of the worst in terms of building materials. This was originally founded by the International Living Future Institute, now known as just Living Future. If you've ever bought paint, you have a decision to make between low VOC and zero VOC. Probably didn't know why. There's all these health impacts that impact the home. But there's also a lot of other materials that are not well disclosed in the marketplace. We know about asbestos, we know about lead, we know about mercury. There's 12,000 other chemicals. These are the ones that are more commonly used, that are embedded into the home. These are essentially making us sick. As we're looking to make the homes more fire resilient, I wanted to highlight flame retardants. There's ways to make the home fire resilient without this. So be sure to work with the architects, try to target red list free materials, and make your home healthier. Speaking of fire resilience, go to the next slide, Billy. We did a tech check yesterday and everything was working fine, so I don't know.
We're on the fire resilience slide. Maybe there's a delay.
Okay, maybe it's me. So wanted to pay a quick homage to USGBC. They came out with a great wildfire defense toolkit, and a lot of these same design features coincide with energy efficiency. So it really goes hand in hand. If you're going to design for fire resiliency, your home is also going to end up becoming more energy efficient. There's a way to build your home, and I also wanted to highlight there's a way to home our fire rating without having a high cost of embodied carbon with a lot of steel and a lot of concrete. You can still use a timber frame home that's well insulated and prevent against fires. So I think that's all the time I have on this for now, but I'll talk with you in a second about the economics.
All right, I'm going to pass the screen sharing on to Patrice Hicks, and she's going to show us Rise Homes.
Perfect. Thank you, Haley, and hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, again, I am Patrice Hicks, and I am the program coordinator manager for our Rise Homes program, which is the Rebuilding Incentives for Sustainable Electric Homes. This program was approved by the California Public Utilities Commission back in 2021, and it provides financial incentives, assistance, and support to help in rebuilding energy efficient all electric homes throughout the state of California. In addition, the program will coordinate with contractors and provide best practice guidance. We'll deeply collaborate with stakeholders such as community-based organizations, local, city, and counties, as well as insurance companies. A lot of this coordination will be left in the hands of our highly trained RISE coordinators, which is a really neat aspect of this program because essentially those folks come from the background of disaster response. So it'll have that unique feel where folks who are recovering from a disaster will have somebody there to help them through the rebuild process. And this is all done to create resiliency, especially in historically underserved communities. So what does this program provide? It does provide incentives for all electric residential homes, which include single family, multifamily, ADUs, modular, and manufactured homes, which we've heard a bit about. You will also have dedicated support. So I just talked about that program staff that will provide support to applicants, builders, and stakeholders throughout the life of the project. So those RISE coordinators are going to be real key in becoming the trusted voice throughout the process. RISE Homes is stackable with other incentives, so applicants can combine funding from other programs, including the California Electric Homes Program, or Cal EHP. And as we'll get into in just a few minutes, there are bonus incentives where there are additional incentives available for folks who decide to look at a whole home battery or ultra low GWP heat pump. Who qualifies for the program? So as we mentioned, this is a residential program for customers who are being served by one of our California investor-owned utilities. The residential property had to have been red tagged by a city, county, or combined jurisdiction that has declared a local emergency proclamation dating back to January 2017. So what does that mean? That means folks that were impacted by a declared disaster going back to the beginning of 2017 would be eligible for the program. The residential new construction would need to comply with Title 24 all electric building codes, and the rebuild would not have received an approved building permit as of November 1st, 2021, which is the date in which the program was approved. So couldn't have permitted before then, and also hasn't been occupied before the program launch date, which is in the near future. What types of homes qualify? So we touched on this a bit earlier, but I think specifically to the manufactured homes, I want to point out that for that participant type, they must comply with Energy Star version 2.0 or higher. And another key thing to point out is when we look at the rebuild versus the home that was red tagged, the rebuild does not need to be the same type of affected home, but the new property must certainly be all electric. So to just break that down for you a bit, folks, what that means is that if your destroyed home was a single family home, but you decide to rebuild a manufactured, well, then certainly you can apply for that manufactured home as long as it's all electric. So let's get a bit into our incentives, which is, I know, the funnest part. And this program is being offered at a holistic level. So essentially, the full electrification of the home is what qualifies you for the direct incentive. So you see that first set of appliances there, and those are the things that would typically make a home all electric, which would therefore be a part of the direct incentive package. As I mentioned earlier, there are some additional incentives available for folks who decide to also install a whole home battery, ultra low GWP refrigerant heat pump, or decide to design their new home as a passive house. What are the dollar amounts associated with these incentives? It's getting even funner, folks. So as you can see here, for our single family home that rebuilds all electric, there is a $10,000 base incentive. You'll see over to the right-hand column, there is also an equity incentive column there. What does that mean? That means that folks who are qualified as equity, which essentially that means folks can be either living in a disadvantaged community or meet one of the other equity criterias, but if that criteria is met and confirmed, then those folks will receive $15,000 for that base incentive level versus the $10,000 that non-equity participants would receive. You also get a glimpse here at the different levels for the different resident types. One thing to point out here is that the multifamily incentive is for multifamily complexes of 4 units or more, and those are paid out at a per unit level to the property owner. Those bonus incentives we chatted about. So again, here we do have that tiered structure for both our equity participants as well as our non-equity participants. And as you can see, I think the highlight of this slide is definitely looking at our passive house measures, where in that case, we would certainly provide a nice sizable incentive for folks who decide to go down the passive house route. I think one thing to point out here is that we know that the passive house certification itself can be a very lengthy process. So one thing I want to point out with this bonus is that essentially, as long as your design meets the criteria of passive house, we will look to pay out this bonus incentive before you complete the certification, but you'll need to ensure that obviously you're building to the specs of that certification. Just a quick little bit of information on each of our bonus measures. So with our whole home batteries, those must comply with the manufacturer's specifications, and you got to make sure you have those interconnection agreements in place with your participating utilities. And again, you must comply with Title 24. Ultra low GWP heat pumps. This applies to heat pump water heaters that use a refrigerant with 10 GWP or less and meet either of the standards here, whether it be Energy Star or the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance standards. Lastly, passive house are big ones. Projects can use the certification pathway, but again, that certification doesn't necessarily need to be all the way completed, but we do need to demonstrate that those measures are being included. All building plans and models must reflect the full set of passive house measures installed. So this is just our way of ensuring that you're meeting those classifications without the burden of having to wait for full certification before we would qualify you for this additional incentive. Lastly, what do I need to receive these fund incentives? So at the front end of the process, there is a nice chunk of documentation that the program team will be looking at. And of course, our RISE coordinators will again be there to help participants in gathering these documents. As construction completes, we will then gather the completion documents, mainly being that certificate of occupancy as well as Title 24 documents. And then, of course, any documents that have been revised from the previous list once construction is complete. It is once we receive all of those completion documents that we will then approve and look to pay the incentive to the participants. And again, it is the RISE coordinator who will really be the main point of contact to really walk folks through this process. Hopefully that was very informative for y'all, and I know that we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, and we'll also be sharing out these slides, which will include the contact information for how to get a hold of the RISE programs team. I believe I am turning it over to John next.
Hi, everyone. I'm back. And now we're going to talk about the fun stuff, how this impacts your wallet. So while Haley's pulling up the slides, we promised you incredible economics for Super Green. That's what I'm going to go through right now. So first, want to kind of set the stage. We mentioned Title 24. So Title 24 is in reference to the Cal Green Building Code. This is the standard for all California new construction homes. And what I'm going to show you is you're basically 90% of the way there to Super Green by just building in California. So, what we're going to talk about is the cost premium between a code compliant home and a Super Green home. So all electric ready appliances, starting here at the top, I want to go through a couple of these. So you're already going to be wired and plumbed for electric appliances. So you might as well just install them. You know, if you're going to spend the money, you're just choosing between one or the other. Induction cooktops, those do come at a premium compared to a conventional electric stove. I like to cook. I don't like cooking on electric. Induction is really something different. I love to, you know, drink tea. It's kind of lame, but I like to drink tea at night. And by the time I take the mug out of the cabinet and put the tea bag in, the water's already boiling. So pretty cool there. You heard a little bit about a heat pump. Don't need to necessarily go into the science about what a heat pump is, but just a different type of HVAC or water heater. It functions much better than conventional electric. It's going to use less energy and perform better than a gas appliance. So you can see here that they're encouraged, they're not required. By 2026, it's likely that these are going to be required. So you might as well take advantage of them now while you have a lot of incentives to lower the cost on those. Craig mentioned earlier about the solar. So you're required to install a little 2 kilowatts or 3 kilowatts, depending on the size of the home, between 5 to 7 solar panels. I encourage you, please work with your architects so that you don't end up with a jigsaw puzzle on the roof. Aesthetically, it looks terrible. You don't need to do that. Just put a bunch of rectangles on the roof in the design package. Going into the insulation, so insulation's measured in R value. This is the thickness and the performance of that insulation. It's measured in R value. The higher the number, the better insulating those walls and roof. Also want to talk about the blower door test in the mandatory air sealing. So the air sealing is measured in air changes per hour 50. 50 is 50 pascals, which is just the pressure that your home is set at the time of the blower door test. They then suck out energy out the front door and measure all the different leaks throughout the home. This is not required. You don't actually have to do that, but you have to submit documentation showing that your home will comply to these standards.
Hey, John, I think you need to get to the economics. We're going to run out of time here. We want to leave a lot of time for Q&A.
I'll get to it. So let's get into the numbers. Haley?
Yeah, just a quick update. We're going to start our Q&A at 10:45 today.
All right, so looking at pre-Title 24, before 2022, you know, you're allowed to buy allowed to build a gas home. You can see there, starting from kind of left to right, you had gas appliances. They're a bit cheaper. The costs in the Title 24 and Super Green columns incorporate the cost of induction cooktops and high-performing Bosch appliances. Some really good, high-quality stuff there. And then you can see going down to HVAC and water heating, you're transitioning from gas to a heat pump plus ERV, which recycles the air and your efficiency. And then the building envelope, which the envelope is just the perimeter of the home. The cost here does not include the cost of framing. We can just assume for all 3 case studies, you have 2x6 exterior framing. But just wanted to show how these few categories stay consistent throughout the process. And you're looking at the second and third row in the right-hand column that shows the premium cost at $37,000 estimated for a 1,500 square foot home to add a battery, add a span panel to optimize that battery, and then additional solar. So next slide. I wanted to talk about the incentives. So there's a lot of ambiguity about these incentives. Trying to just streamline the process for you, how these impact the bottom line numbers. The top line is not is for base incentives for electric homes, and then you can see there's a couple different types of incentives for solar and batteries, and then additional support for heat pumps. Going through a couple of these, so we heard from RISE, and there's 2 California state additional incentives available currently. The California Energy Smart Homes program is only available to SCE customers. So if you're in that jurisdiction, which Altadena and Pacific Palisades, I believe you are, you want to be able to optimize, and all of these stack on top of each other. ITC, it's a 30% tax credit on the solar and batteries. This is currently on the chopping block with the Senate, so we can hope that they keep these embedded in the help facilitate the capital cost. But if they don't, you'll see on the next slide, these it's still an economically viable option. So next slide, Haley. And these capital costs, just to, if you are looking for a fine option for your home, these capital costs would be included in the price of the mortgage. So now looking at your energy bill, these are some estimates that we put together. Again, starting from the left, you have an electric bill, you have a gas bill, and you have your bill at the pump for your gas cars. Now transitioning to an all-electric lifestyle, you now have one electric bill, and that includes the cost of your vehicles. You can see there, if you've installed solar in the past, you may not have been excited to get your bill. You still have a couple $100s a month that you're paying. That's because you don't have enough solar. So now as we transition to super green, that bill is down to about $450 estimated. And that bill is really about kind of some residual costs. If it's a really cloudy month or something, you had some energy cost over the course of the year. Those energy costs should level out to near zero. But then there's also taxes and fees and other things you're going to have to pay. So it's not going to be a zero energy bill. You'll pay something, but you're going to end up with about $4,000 worth of savings, including the cost of your vehicle transportation fees. Next slide, Haley. We got two slides here, and if you've fallen asleep during any part of this, I encourage you to pay attention now, because this is really where it all kind of comes together. So again, look at that premium cost to go super green, to have a net zero home with resilience during the time of a blackout, and being able to optimize the solar and use solar power overnight with that battery. You have a premium cost, which then becomes lesser as you stack on these incentives. I illustrated a couple different examples. If you are in SCE territory, you'll get an additional $3,500, which will stack on top of these. So you can see, this is going to make the economics really incredible, as per our title. And then going into the 2,500 square foot example, for those of you that want a little bit more space, the incentives don't necessarily scale up except for the ITC credit, which hopefully will still be viable. But the economics are still, really favorable for this type of development. So happy to answer any questions, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, John. And this slide is just a quick.
Haley, yeah.
Oh, yeah, this slide's just a quick shout out to some of our collaborators that we've been working with on this initiative. And then, yeah, I'm gonna start a quick Q&A, so we'll just turn our cameras back on here, and I will shut off my screen, and we'll answer some of your questions that you've had during the session. So let me pull that up. One question.
If I could just add something to the economics. So John showed the payback periods, and that was a really nice way to present those, John. I just want to add that, when you look at $4,000 of savings a year on a basically a $40,000, $37,000 premium for super green, that's equivalent to a 10% return, which, it's 4,000 on, less than 40,000, but say it was 4,000 on 40,000, that would be a 10% per year return. That's the best return you can ever get on any investment. That's basically a guaranteed rate of return. And that's tax free, because it's the savings is not taxable, right? It's just money that you're not spending. And the the equivalent to get a 10% return tax-free is 15%. You'd have to get a long-term certificate of deposit return of 15% to get that same 10% return. And that was without any incentives, right? That's if you didn't get any incentives to buy down that $37,000 upfront cost. So I just want to make sure to put that in terms of how people might be thinking about a return on investment. 10%, pretty darn good tax-free.
Great. Thanks, Craig. I think we're going to get started now on our Q&A. We have a few questions, just starting from the top here. Dylan Miller is the staff air pollution specialist at the California Air Resources Board, and he has two questions. The first one is, do you have analysis of the total cost of ownership as including capital and operations over maybe 20 years as compared to the average home energy consumption?
So great question. The initial economic analysis that's been done is kind of a first cut. The Clean Coalition does want to perform a total lifetime cost analysis and on the economics, but we have not done that yet. This first cut is kind of at the very preliminary level, and but we do hope to, over the next month or two, to conduct a deeper economic analysis.
Great. And then a follow-up question from Dylan Miner. Does air sealing create greater risk of mold damage if there's a water leak somewhere in the house? I think that's probably for John. John, I think your mic is off.
No, the air barrier, the best. How about now?
Good.
Yeah, the air barrier, no, you got to think of it the same way as, if you're wearing a t-shirt when you go to the gym, or you're wearing Under Armour, that's the difference between, a Tyvek, typical house wrap, and, a Pro Mento, which is going to have a higher performance, reduced amount of air penetration into the home. It's still breathable, right? So every home is going to get some type of before the siding goes on, but this just allows to be better performing, and yeah, it actually performed better against mold.
Great. Another question from Frank Kelly, the owner of Solar Source Consulting. Do the net zero energy homes require passive solar design?
No. So you can see that the building envelope stayed consistent between Title 24 and Super Green. Passive home is a standard. In the past, I've built what's called passive light. I haven't gone all the way to those standards. The capital costs become pretty high to be able to achieve all of the energy efficiency measures, and I haven't seen sufficient return to justify that cost. So the economics analysis I put together was just on essentially a Title 24 compliant building envelope, which is already, again, like I said, really, really good, a lot better than most of the country. And that was just on one example. Every home is unique. You would need to do some extensive energy modeling. That's kind of what my team does. Justin DePaulo, he's an expert in energy modeling to optimize it for all types of homes. But no, you don't need a passive house design to be able to achieve net zero.
And I'm not sure if the question was passive house. I think he just said passive solar. And I think the corollary to this is that if you do have passive solar features, and passive house is the ultimate gold standard in energy efficiency. So the Clean Coalition encourages passive house, by the way, but it's not part of Super Green, right? We didn't put that into the Super Green definition. But passive solar, passive house, all of that stuff will help reduce your energy usage, which will reduce the amount of solar you need to achieve net zero. So those things are related, but you don't have to do passive house, passive solar, passive anything in order to get to net zero. You're just going to need, it's just going to change the amount of solar panels you need in order to achieve net zero.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Jose Torre Bueno, the Executive Director of the Center for Community Energy. And he asks, does this take into account the lower production in the winter or should the array be sized for winter production?
You want to take that one, Craig?
I can take that. Hello, Jose. The answer is that net zero is taking the number of solar kilowatt hours produced over the course of a year and comparing that to the amount of energy consumed over the course of a year. So you're going to have seasonal adjustments. The reality is that the way that the interconnection rules work in California, the Rule 21 rules, you cannot oversize very far beyond net zero. So that's going to limit the amount of solar that you can actually put into the house. If you were off grid, then you would actually, if you didn't want to have any behavior change, if you go off grid, you definitely have to design for the winter time.
Great. Next question is from Jaime Rodriguez, who asks, this is a question for Patrice, actually. Patrice, you're still here? He asks, for RISE, how do we contact the coordinator? That will all be available after the webinar. All of these slides and information will be made public. Follow-up question.
Absolutely. You can use that info@Rise Homes email, and that'll get you directly to our team of coordinators.
Great. And then the follow-up question is, for RISE, is a PHI or PHIUS, not sure if that's supposed to be pronounced differently, is that certification required? I am building a passive home, but was not going to spend the extra couple grand for the certification. Do I still qualify?
Right, great question. So as long as the home is built to the specs that would meet that passive house certification, that is essentially what qualifies you for the incentive. And if you look at it that way, essentially you could receive that incentive and then decide to utilize it to complete that certification process down the line, which I know could become a bit costly. So essentially the certification itself is not required to receive that passive house adder, but the specs will need to meet the standards that would be a part of the certification. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great, thank you. This is a question from Alexander Meeks, the director of the Milken Institute. Hi, Alex. This is a question regarding the stackable incentives. Has RISE or Clean Coalition observed property owners successfully getting short-term bridge loans to fund the cost of covered building components until they get reimbursed via the incentives?
Alex, that's where the Milken Institute comes in. So we need you to come with some good solutions there, buddy. The Clean Coalition, I'll answer for the Clean Coalition. John may have some additional insights as well as Patrice. But the Clean Coalition, we have not gotten overly involved in the financing arrangements other than power purchase agreements. That is a financial arrangement we're very familiar with. But in terms of bridge loans and construction loans and whatnot, that's outside of the Clean Coalition's purview up until now, at least. John, Patrice, if you have something to add, please do.
Nothing to add for me
Yeah,
here.
I would just add,
for,
if you looked at those stackable.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if you looked at those stackable incentives for those at a lower income bracket, your cost premium, capital premium is really only like $12,000, after all applicable incentives. So that's where we're really hoping that others step in to provide supportive financing, because historically, these net zero homes are for people at a higher income bracket. They really don't need to be. That's why we want to share this information, show the economics, and then really, kind of lean on those that are, in the field, providing supportive financing to help bridge that gap and make it accessible to everyone.
And I'll just add that because these are new homes, and John had alluded to this earlier, right? You can wrap all of this as all goes into your construction costs, so it would just get rolled into the mortgage. And however you're financing your construction, you would just finance, the super green features in the same financing arrangement. So mortgage, whatever construction loan a builder might have or a property owner. I'm not quite sure how all that works, But Alex, maybe we'll do another webinar and you can tell us all the great solutions that Milken Institute can bring to the table.
Great. All right, next question from Jeffrey Perrone. He asks, are there significant differences in the efficiency of microwave ovens?
I'm not sure.
Not that it's going to significantly impact your energy bill.
Yeah, I'd say just make sure you buy one that has an Energy Star label on it, right? Like at least get that. And then I would refer to Consumer Reports, usually does a pretty good job of detailing the advantages of one appliance over another.
Great. Another question from Jaime Rodriguez asks, this is a Craig question. Can we use Clean Coalition for energy modeling? I was going to hire a passive home consultant who would do the modeling.
So the Clean Coalition is available for some preliminary activities. I would say you've got, and the Clean Coalition we do consulting work as well. John mentioned that he has an energy modeler, and so this webinar is not trying to drum up business for the Clean Coalition. We're trying to educate the marketplace, and we're happy to be as helpful as we can be. I think if it got to where there was a lot of work involved, we would either, Clean Coalition would either have to get a fee, or we would hand you over to somebody like John, who sounds like, I know John. John would need a fee to do, a significant amount of work as well.
Great. We have some questions here regarding just if the slides will be available. So I'll just repeat that, yes, all of these slides presented today, as well as the recording of this webinar, will be available. John, I think there's a bit of you. Can you try again, or maybe if you shut up your webcam, it'll help with the connection a bit.
Is that any better, or should I do that?
We can hear you now, but it's intermittent.
Sound good?
So.
Okay. Well, it's the real last sentiment here, but I do encourage energy modeling. During the architectural design, but I want to emphasize, a lot of people are going to build the same type or similar types of homes. So if you work together, with your neighbors, you can aggregate those costs into one home design, and incorporate those solar calcs, the battery calcs, the insulation calcs, make a lot of the design decisions ahead of time, and bake that into either if you're going to build a Jane's cottage or mid-century modern, whatever you have, get that all baked into a pre-factory. Now you have digital twin that's super green, that is really going to expedite the process. So the more that I know Altadena has a neighborhood captain collective they're trying to aggregate a lot of this knowledge. I'd really go to those captains and try to work together with these architects. You don't want to have 9,000 custom home designs. It's really not necessary. It can save you guys a lot of money up front. Great.
Another question from Jaime. Do we need a wall battery, or can we use an E2H solution? A F-150 is like having 10 power walls.
So, the V to G, the V to house, vehicle to grid, vehicle to V to X, right? Vehicle to whatever. If you're going to try to use that to power your house, you run into the situation, what if the car's not there, right? You have no backup. And I've heard some there's been challenges with the V to X technologies. The long-term future is that the perfect situation is going to be where you have a very small home battery to make sure that if somebody's got the EV away from the house and the grid goes down, that battery can kind of ride through relatively short period for some number of hours, maybe one day, and then the vehicle can return, and like the question said, right, there's 10 times more energy in that vehicle battery than the battery that's usually at home. So you would have long-term resilience, from that extended battery that you would drive home and plug in. But I think that for the time being, I would definitely recommend that people get the home battery, in addition to an EV that might be capable of V2G today or in the future.
Great. Another question. I know we're kind of at the end here, but if we go a couple minutes over, you're welcome to stay. This is from Henry Mayer from Green Start Electrify, who asks, to what extent will this initiative influence grid planning? Will communities need to add headroom to account for the additional electrical load on the distribution grid?
Well, Henry, hello, first of all. The bottom line is if you design net zero, your load is going to be way lower than it would be if you didn't design net zero. So I think your question was probably focused on the all electric piece of it. But if you're all electric and net zero, you're going to have this community, right? If every home in the community was all electric net zero, your load's going to be way lower than it would be if you didn't hit net zero, even if you just hit the Title 24 requirements like John detailed, because the amount of solar you're going to have is going to be a fraction of the amount of solar you'll have for net zero.
Great. And with that, we're at 11 a.m. So I'm going to call it the end of this webinar. So thank you all for attending, and I hope we all learned something. And please do send us an email or contact us if you have any additional questions, and we're happy to help. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.